Welcome, guys, to the 10th episode of Between the Lunges. Today we have Miguel Mendes. Miguel, be welcome. Thank you very much for being here. Please tell us something about you.
Mm-hmm. First of all, thank you, Andre, for having me. It's an honor. So a bit about myself. I am a fitness and nutrition coach, and I have a master's degree in sport and exercise nutrition. I'm also an accredited sports nutritionist in the UK. That's where I initially studied. Before that, I must say, before I became a muscle and food nerd, I was a food nerd. I actually have a background in cookery and food production. And I do cook every day. Food is one of my biggest passions. And I do think that helps a lot, especially in the fitness industry, because you see people and most people think you can't be fit and enjoy your diet. That's not true. So that's one of the things I also focus on. But mainly as a coach, I help my clients improve their body composition. So we talk about fat loss, building muscle. But more than that, I also help them make sure that they're focusing on improving the overall health, building a healthy relationship with food, and also creating sustainable habits that last a lifetime. Because at the end of the day, sometimes it's people, they want to lose fat and they try unsustainable methods, and then this affects their relationship with food. It affects their happiness because they're miserable, and then I help them find that balance. And last but not least, there's a lot of bullshit out there in the fitness industry, and sometimes there's so much information, or should I say misinformation, that people don't even know what they should focus on. And as a coach, I try my best to teach my clients the fundamental principles of, hey, this is what you need to focus on to have a fantastic physique, to feel good, and to live an active and healthy lifestyle without worrying about all of that bullshit.
Seems a easy path for you to achieve. Just for curiosity, do you think there's more information in the UK or in Portugal? Better information?
That's a good question. Great question. I think nowadays, with the way social media works, you can find information, and I'm not just saying good quality information, but there's definitely no shortage of information regardless of where you're from. However, I would say in Portugal, maybe not everyone speaks English, and if you speak English, that's a big plus, because there's a lot of content creators in English, and if you know where you can get your information from, that's definitely a plus. But we do have some good content creators in Portuguese, especially in the evidence-based side of things, and the community is growing. So hopefully, it's just going to keep getting better and better. I think it's mostly about where you're getting your information from.
Yeah.
That's probably going to be what's going to be the biggest change.
Makes a lot of sense. Miguel, can you tell us about your current goals and some of your future goals for yourself?
Mm-hmm. Would you like to know personal goals, physique goals, just
both of
general
them,
goals?
if possible?
Yeah. So that's a good question, because, with the new year, I was actually thinking about that the other day. Fitness-wise, I used to be very, I've been training for 11 years now, and I've always been very, I'm not going to lie, in the beginning, I was a bit of a bro, didn't really know what I was doing. I was just, eating my protein, my veggies, eating a clean diet, and doing the best I could. But then as I started studying more and, entered kind of the evidence-based space, I became a bit overly focused on optimizing every single thing. And last year, after 10 years of training, I actually experienced a bit of burnout for the first time. And I'm not just saying sometimes you're not motivated to train. That's perfectly normal, because at the end of the day, if you only train when you're motivated, you're not going to train
sometimes
that often. Yeah, just sometimes, yeah. But last year I was just feeling a bit burned out, and it wasn't just for a day or two or a week or two. It was just like a month, 2 months, 3 months, and that kind of made me take a step back and reevaluate my training. And what I learned is sometimes in the pursuit of optimizing every single thing, you kind of lose a bit of enjoyment.
Happiness.
For example, when I was training as a bro and I didn't know anything about how to optimize your training program, I was doing things like drop sets, supersets, because the bros told me you have to do this if you want to build
It's a
muscle.
better way, yeah.
And and it's fun. It's fun to train to failure and then do a drop set and then train to failure again and feel like shit, but it's fun. With the current research, that hey, supersets aren't gonna result in more muscle growth. Drop sets aren't better than traditional sets. So you start kind of, if you're not careful, you might develop this mindset that I was in a few years ago of, why should I do a drop set if I can rest more and push harder on a traditional set if you have time, of course. But then I started losing a bit of that fire. And this year, this is a long-winded answer to say, this year I'm experimenting with a different training style. I'm going a bit more back to my bodybuilding roots in terms of I'm doing a bit more supersets, drop sets, more intensity techniques. And I'm not just worried about optimizing things based on the current literature, because at the end of the day, we know that individual context matters and enjoyability is also something very important in a training program. And that's basically what I want to focus on. Like, I've been doing this for a while. I'm pretty happy with my physique. Of course, there's always things that you can improve. I could definitely, right now I'm in a lean bulk or gaining phase. I'm not tracking macros. I can explain that later. But basically right now, my main focus is just, I want to enjoy training the way I used to, like 2 years ago. So that's one.
I think that's a very wise decision by you, because I almost feel the same way. Like, I will say, like 2 years ago, there was, or 1 to 2 years, there was a lot of optimization information out there, like from single arm cables, exercise, and I tried to put them on my training program, and I didn't feel any enjoyment because of the time, or because of the it takes a lot of work to one side after weight to the another side, and even the results, like you said, from drop sets and the normal sets, the literature tell us that it's almost the same results. So having fun on your training days is a lot important as well, like you said. Miguel, and for your future goals about your work, can you tell us something about that?
For sure. So right now, one of my main priorities is growing my coaching business. Initially, I thought that I wanted to work with just serious lifters and people that were interested in natural bodybuilding. But over the past years, I've worked with a lot. I was actually fortunate when I was in the Masters, I worked with athletes, but then I also started working more with Gen Pop, so the general population, people that have a busy professional life and they want to improve their health, their fitness, but they don't know where to start. So one of my goals is, how can I help more people, and how can I also provide valuable information, especially on places like social media where there's a lot of bullshit out there, and just basically make this a better space. At the end of the day, there's no shortage of coaches, but one of my goals is to kind of create a community of like-minded individuals where we're all striving for not just I have this expression where I say fitness is about making all kinds of gains. What I mean by that is, you have the physical gains, of course, aesthetics, that's a part of the game, but also health gains, mindset gains, how you feel, how you look, how you perform, and sharing just passion. So that's one of the goals, is kind of growing the business as I create this community of people that, they want to grow together. And have fun.
It makes a lot of sense to be complete, like at least trying to be. Miguel, let's start with your main theme. It's about the fat loss phase. Can you tell us what do you need in a fat loss phase? I mean, in your body in general, calorie wise. That's what I want you to say.
Yeah. Got it. So, I think no one's going to be surprised when I say your first priority should be making sure that you're in a calorie deficit. So that means, just burning more calories than you're eating. I know this is thrown a lot on social media, and sometimes the advice isn't really helping anyone because people know, okay, I need to be in a calorie deficit. I know I need to move more, eat less, but then that barely scratches the surface. That doesn't really tell you what you need to focus on. And then again, people end up doing all sorts of things like extreme diets, way too much cardio, and move more, eat less. So if I starve myself and I run every day, I'm gonna lose fat, when in reality it's quite different.
Can you tell us the difference between a fast loss phase and a slow one?
So one of the things you'll notice, especially with New Year's, and this is a common misconception, people think that the faster you lose weight, the better. As in, I have a lot of fat to lose. I need results yesterday. And this is basically what you should not do, because the faster you lose weight, the higher the likelihood of rebounding, so regaining the weight. And you see this a lot with yo-yo diets. People, let's say, new year, new me, they start a new diet, they lose a ton of weight, and then eventually the diet is not sustainable long-term. They just fall back to old habits and they regain all of the weight, sometimes even more. So one of the things here is the main goal isn't just to lose weight or lose fat, it's to lose it and keep it off. So, most people, they don't have a problem with losing fat if they follow, a diet or fat diet. The problem is, can you actually maintain that long term? Can you sustain it in a way that it's enjoyable, it fits your lifestyle, it doesn't make you feel miserable? So that's the hard part. I would generally say that for most people, fast fat loss phases are not what you should be aiming for. Of course, depending on your experience, the type of athlete, if you're an athlete or just gen pop, that can also affect things. For example, if you're a natural bodybuilder, you can do something as a mini cut, which is an aggressive fat loss phase. That's a short-term, more fast-paced fat loss phase, and that's perfectly fine because it's structured. But if you're just, someone looking to lose some fat and, you have time, I would just say go slower and focus on building sustainable habits and actually enjoying the process. Because again, unsustainable methods lead to unsustainable results. The goal is not just to lose, it's to lose and maintain. So that's pretty much the way I see things.
It makes sense. Can you give us an example of how much weight can it be a fast and a slow one?
Mm-hmm. So usually you have the theoretical recommendations that for sustainable fat loss, most people should be aiming to lose 0.5 to 1% of their total body weight per week. This is something we know. But in practice, when you're actually working with people, I find from my experience that sometimes it can be quite different. And it's also important to note that fat loss, there's a lot of benefits for fat loss, and I'm not just talking about aesthetics. It can also improve your quality of life and your health. But sometimes your mindset can be affected by fat loss. Like you're so focused on fat loss that you're neglecting other important components of your life. So that's why I'm not too overly attached to numbers. I do use guidelines with every client. We have guidelines that we're working towards to make sure that we're kind of, if the plan's working or not. But before we focus on the numbers, we actually focus on building a strong foundation, so habits. But going back to your question of examples, I would say for most people, a fat loss phase can last about 8 to 12 weeks on average. That's like how long it can take. For some, it can go up to 16 weeks. But then again, it depends on your starting point, how much fat you have to lose. And another mistake that sometimes people make is they think, I need to lose as much fat as possible for as long as I can. And we could also talk about this, but this is also not the best approach, I would say, which is if you have a lot of weight to lose, there's no rush. It's best to, let's say you've been dieting for 3 to 4 months. It's best to just do a diet break or focus on something else, because there's multiple factors that can affect fat loss. Number one, if you can't stay consistent long term, it's definitely going to affect you. But the longer you are in a diet, the more it's going to run you down. So you might you might encounter some issues such as increased hunger, feeling less energy. Your performance in the gym goes down, which may impact how much muscle you can actually retain during a fat loss phase. Not to mention that there's also other things such as metabolic adaptations, where the more weight you lose, the harder it is to lose more weight, because your body finds ways of compensating your energy expenditure, which in other words means you think you're in a deficit, but your progress is actually slowing down because your body's finding ways of burning less energy. So again, there's strategies for this, but that's why I don't recommend just going hard, going fast, and dieting for a whole year, for example.
It like you said, it depends of each person and their style of life and everything that they have in their life, and if they can make it happen or not, kind of. Miguel, you already talked about it. Can you tell us what is a diet break and how can it be helpful for someone?
Mm-hmm. So a diet break is basically, as the name suggests, when you're dieting, you're in a calorie deficit. With the diet break, you bring your calories up to maintenance, and your main goal is to maintain your progress instead of just focusing more on fat loss. Now, the benefits of a diet break is, number one, it can actually help you reduce fatigue from the diet, because again, being in a fat loss phase for months, it does take a toll on you. You start to feel less energy, more run down. Performance might not be great. Even from a diet perspective, you might be tired of eating the same foods or restricting yourself. A diet break is pretty much an opportunity of, hey, let's increase your calories to maintenance. You're not going to regain any fat, so that's great, but you'll be able to eat more calories, and that will help you feel more energetic. It can actually help improve your performance by, for example, when you're dieting, you have less, let's say, resources for recovery. For example, when you up the calories, especially if you up the carbohydrates, you can increase your glycogen, which is basically how we can store carbohydrates in the muscles for energy. That can be used to fuel your workouts. So there's the performance aspect of things. And then the metabolic adaptations that we're talking about. There's some research on this. It's an ongoing topic, but there used to be the question of, are diet breaks superior to a continuous calorie deficit for fat loss? Will they help you with metabolic adaptations, hormonal adaptations? Will they pretty much just result in a superior strategy? And initially, there was some people said maybe, but now with the current research, the main conclusion at the moment is that being in a consistent calorie deficit or a diet break, they're both going to lead to pretty similar results. However, and if we're not just talking about the fat loss or aesthetics, if we're just also contemplating other things such as psychology and how you feel with the diet, the relationship with food, a diet break can be very helpful, because, again, imagine you've been dieting for 4 months. You can't remember the last time you were not in that fat loss mindset, because this is a thing, right? I always tell my clients, hey, fat loss is a phase. It's not a lifestyle, because it's very easy. You see this a lot with people in the fitness industry. Most of us start out by wanting to lose fat. That's normal. But then eventually you need to learn how to transition that, like to maintenance or a gaining phase. Because if not, you'll get stuck in that, how do I cut calories? I need to eat less. I shouldn't eat this food. And if you're stuck in that mindset, it can affect you not just physically, but mentally. And regardless of what you eat, you're always feeling like you're restricting yourself, or you have these very rigid like rules. So a diet break from a psychological standpoint, it's actually been shown in research that it can improve the enjoyability of your diet. And again, if you enjoy something, you're more likely to stick to it long term, and you're more likely to get the results you want. So diet breaks, they're not essential, but they can be a very helpful tool to help people make sustainable progress.
One of the things that I wanted you to tell us is how long do you think that they should last? 1 week, 1 month, something between them?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on, for example, do you have goals that are time sensitive? For example, if you're going to compete in a natural bodybuilding competition, you need to be mindful of that, because if you add diet breaks, then you need to add that time to your prep. But for example, let's go back to Gen Pop. Usually diet breaks, you can implement them in a plan proactively or reactively. So this means that you can plan them ahead. Let's say for every month of dieting, we'll do 1 week of diet break.
Okay.
This is something you can do. Or you can add them reactively based on your feedback. So for example, let's say, you're doing a fat loss phase. You've been dieting for 2 months, but you feel great. Energy is great. Performance in the gym is great. It's going up. You don't feel any of the side effects of dieting. So, everything's looking fine. Then there's no need to implement a diet break just for the sake of it. But again, this is highly individual. But let's say you've been dieting for 2 months. Suddenly you've been feeling very hungry. Mentally,
Exhausted.
you're tired. Yeah, you're tired. Performance is actually going down. You're having a hard time keeping your numbers the same. And it's just an uphill battle. Then, okay, let's do a diet break. Let's do it for a week. And usually I'll start with a week. I'll see how my clients feel. And then based on the feedback, you can actually extend the diet break and just enter a bit. Again, a diet break is you're at maintenance calories, and then a maintenance phase is basically there's no hard rules. You can do it for 1 week, 2 weeks. You can do it for a month if you'd like. It really depends on the timeline, the goals, and the feedback. But for most people, 1 to 2 weeks, I find that it works really well. I know some people prefer programming them as you diet for, let's say 3 weeks, you break for 1. You diet for 3, you break for 1. I prefer more of the, how are things going? How are we progressing? If everything's looking good, let's not change anything. If we do need to change something, what are the options?
Yeah, it makes sense. One of the things that I'm remembering when you are saying was the Christmas week, when people want to enjoy life even if they are on a fat loss phase. So I think, at least for my experience and with my clients, I think it makes sense to have a diet break that week, so they don't feel like they are ruining their life and eventually enjoying that week and that event. Are the macros the only thing that they need to be worried about in this phase, or the calories have the same importance?
This is a fantastic question, actually. So macros, for anyone listening, we're talking about protein, carbohydrates, and fats, macronutrients. But so for fat loss and body composition, at the end of the day, the most important thing is being in a calorie deficit. Therefore, calories are king. If you're in a deficit, you will lose fat. No doubt about that. But that doesn't mean it's the only thing you should worry about. And I'm just talking about calories here. Some people, they might say, oh yeah, you should also worry about protein. But just worrying about calories and protein is not enough. And the reason for that is two things, but the main one is health. So, I encourage people not to look at just macros, but to think about food and how it impacts your health. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about the physique. You don't want to just look good. You also want to feel good. You want to perform well, and you want to age gracefully. So, for example, you can be 8% body fat, look amazing, but then you can feel like shit. Your metabolic health might be poor. Your hormones might be in a poor place. So, regardless of whether you're in a fat loss phase or building muscle, I always encourage you to cover your bases. So we're talking about things such as micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, fiber. All of these play an important role in your health and will also contribute directly to your results, because if you're feeling better, chances are, your progress is going to be better than if you're feeling like crap. And then there's this, I remember when it started showing up more and more, the if it fits your macros movement, right? Which is like, okay, we know that for fat loss, we just need to be in a deficit. Therefore, as long as we can fit these foods in our macros, so our nutrition goals, we can lose fat. And in theory, that works. But then again, you'll miss out on a lot of nutrients. From a satiety or hunger perspective, it's not ideal as well, because you can like chug protein shakes and eat pizza. You can fit your macros, but you'll probably be hungrier. You'll miss out on fiber, again, vitamins and minerals. And then if you have nutritional deficiencies, you might run into some health problems, which will certainly affect things such as your recovery and just overall results. So again, I like to use a rule of the 80-20% rule. Most coaches use that rule. I didn't come up with it, but I think it's fantastic. And then depending on the clients and their goals, you can adjust those ratios. Some people might be 90% to 10%, but 80 to 20% is a good balance, because it just means that 80% of the time you should be aiming for nutrient-dense foods that are minimally processed. So we're talking about high-quality proteins. We're talking about whole grains, fruits, vegetables. And then 20% of the time, you can have fun. You can include foods that might not be as nutritious, but they're good for, they're good for the soul. They taste good. They make you go like, that's good. Things like, pizza, ice cream, donuts, burger. So if you can find that balance, good. If you don't have balance and you come to me saying, hey, if it fits your macros, bro, I don't think that's a smart option.
It's funny because I was remembering what you told us about the training, and if that rule can be applied. Have the optimal training, but still have exercises that you like. At least I remember that, and I think it applies at least almost the same way. Miguel, can you tell us about what is the importance of the protein in this phase, and how much do you need for it to be optimal?
So protein is, no doubt something most people have heard of, and it definitely plays an essential role in building muscle, recovery, fat loss. From a fat loss perspective, one of the main things that protein can help us with is not just maintaining muscle as you diet down, because again, if you're in a deficit, you have fewer resources. And one of the things you see a lot is when people crash diets, they barely eat any calories. And if you're barely eating anything and you're not eating sufficient protein, the chances of losing more muscle mass are higher. And that's not good, because you do not want to lose muscle simply because it's not just about the looks. It also plays an important role in your health and metabolic health. So that's one thing. And then from a hunger and satiety standpoint, protein is the macronutrient, so protein, carbs, and fats, that has the highest impact on helping you manage your appetite. So basically, if you eat a high protein diet, chances are you won't feel as hungry compared to if you eat a low protein diet. But this is only true up to a certain threshold, because there's this idea of if protein helps with satiety, the more protein I eat, the more satiated I will feel. But research shows that if you're eating enough protein or sufficient protein, and I'll get to that in a second, then you don't really get extra benefits from a satiety standpoint. And you might be better off including other things such as carbohydrate sources or fats, because let's not forget that we need all three macros, and they all play a different role. Carbs, not just for performance and recovery, although that's very important, especially as you're dieting down. You can be a bit more strategic with carbohydrates and when you eat them. But then also fats, for example, people, they're usually afraid of fats, but they can help us, for example, with hormonal health, and they play an important role as well. Not just, I guess most people don't worry about them as much as protein. That's what I'm trying to get to. In terms of guidelines,
sorry, I think they don't understand the need of it, or they don't know. And like you said, there's misinformation about the fat that we need to be worried about that. But if it's on the health levels of it, I don't think, like you said, there's no problem, and it's necessary for our health.
Yeah. And I'll be the first to say, so I think this is a quick segue here, or tangent. It's like people think that eating fat makes you fat, but that's not how it works. And trust me, like even today, as a nutritionist, when I started, I was afraid of eating butter because I thought if I eat butter, I'll get fat. Like regardless of the amount of butter I eat, even if it's a tiny spoon, it's going to turn into fat. And that's not how things work. We could go on about the different types of fat, but that's not the main question here. So going back to protein, there's a lot of different numbers being thrown out there. Right now, the research is showing that if you're eating 1.6 grams per kilogram per day of protein, that is sufficient for either if you're building muscle.
Sorry, so that's if you're in a surplus, per kilo or per pound?
1.6 grams per kilo.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that would be right now, based on, if I'm not mistaken, regardless of whether you're in a fat loss phase or a building phase or in a deficit or a surplus, that seems to be a number that can help you retain your muscle mass or actually make sure that you're optimizing muscle growth. Now, there's a lot of discussion around protein. Some people say, hey, if protein doesn't have any downsides, then shouldn't you just eat more just in case? And then you do have recommendations that say when you're in a deficit, since the chances of losing muscle mass are higher, then you could increase your protein intake to something. Some recommendations go as high as 2.2 grams per kilogram per day. And I'm not going to use pounds right now because I think most of the people listening are kilograms. But if it was pounds, it would be something like 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of protein per day. But that's pretty straightforward. I would say it depends. Like most people, most Gen Pop clients I work with, they're not eating enough protein. But most people I work with that are recreational lifters and they've been doing this for a while, a lot of them actually overeat protein and they undereat things like carbs and fats.
Can you tell us about how much they normally overeat, for example?
Yeah. So let me do some quick math here because quick math is not my strong suit. But let's say a 70 kg man, right? 70 kg times 1.6, that's 112 grams of protein. Now, if you're a nutrition nerd or you've been doing this for a while, 112 grams of protein is not that hard to eat in a day, especially if you're eating 4 to 5 meals a day. It's very feasible. But I've noticed, again, 70 kg, that's our example here. I've noticed that sometimes people might eat up to 180, 200 grams of protein because sometimes they're not tracking. They're just eating as much protein as they can and they think they have to. Or sometimes it's that fear of, I don't want to lose muscle mass, therefore I will eat as much protein as I can. And again, if there's one macronutrient that I think it's okay to overeat, that's probably protein. It's probably not going to be, it's not going to have any significant downsides. But if it's impacting the rest of your diet, especially your carbs and fats, then that can be impairing a bit on the recovery side of things, performance, and that's something that you should be mindful of.
I think that having the point of enjoyment is important as well. At least for, I think that even carbs and fats taste better, right? So having some enjoyment is important as well. Miguel, now we will be talking about the bulk phase or the gaining phase. Can you tell us, is the bulk just opposite of the fat loss phase?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if I would call it the opposite. I mean, if you look at it from a fat loss phase, you're in a calorie deficit. A bulking phase, your main goal is to build muscle. And we know that being in a calorie surplus, so eating more calories than you're burning can actually help you build more muscle. Then I guess in that sense, you could say it's the opposite. But there are some differences. Mainly it comes down to nutrition because training doesn't change that much. But I just want to highlight this because I've had people ask me, what's the difference between a cut and a bulk? And I'm sure we can talk about this, but sometimes it's like a cut, you eat clean. A bulk, you can eat whatever you want, whenever you want. It's just like a free pass.
Is this having everything that you want, or do you need to have some cautions between, for example, having a fast gaining phase or a slow one?
Mm-hmm. So that's the $1 million question. And I think that is definitely something a lot of people get wrong. They think, while I'm cutting, I need to be very mindful of my food choices. I need to be very restrictive. And then when I'm bulking, anything goes. I can eat whatever I want, whenever I want, how much I want. And this is a mistake because this is an easy way of getting extra body fat. And then, the more body fat you gain, you'll have to trim it down in the future for a cut. And instead of cutting for, let's say, 2 to 3 months, you might have to cut for 4 to 6 months. So the main reason here, I think the common misconception is I need to be in a surplus to build muscle. Therefore, if I eat more, I'll build more muscle. However, unfortunately, research shows that you can't force feed muscle growth. What this means is when you're in a surplus, there's only so much of that extra energy that actually goes into the muscle building process. More than what you need is actually going to be converted into body fat, so your body can use it, as an energy storage. And you actually have some interesting research on this. We have athletes that are eating, a slight surplus, or athletes that are eating whatever they want, and they both gain the same amount of lean body mass or very similar amounts of lean body mass. But the group that can eat whatever they want actually gained a lot more body fat. So I would say you don't need to be as mindful during as you have to be during a cut, but you do need to have a plan, because it's not just about eating as much as you can. It's about being in a slight surplus over time so that you're mostly gaining muscle, or that most of those extra calories are going where you want them, aka building muscle, and not fat gain.
I'll give some of my experience, and I want your opinion, because even for myself, I have some difficulties on gaining weight, at least for the moment. And even having bad choices of food helps, because even if someone wants to eat completely clean, it's not the amount of the amount of food that you need to eat will be a lot higher than if you eat junk food, for example.
Yeah. So that's a fantastic point. So I'm glad you brought it up. So 2 things. Number one, there's this idea of I need to eat clean all the time. I'm not a fan of that idea, because I understand what people mean by eating clean. We're talking about nutrient-dense foods that are usually not processed. And most people would refer to eating healthier foods versus junk food. I understand that distinction. But when you're in a bulking phase, or a lean bulk gaining phase, whatever you want to call it, if you have a lot of calories to eat, and if you try to eat all of that with minimally processed, high volume foods, you're going to have a hard time, because you're going to feel stuffed. You're not going to be able to eat as many calories as you need. And this is a fantastic opportunity. So even though I mentioned that you still need to be mindful of your choices during a gaining phase, this doesn't mean that
it's the best way.
You're still, so you're still in a surplus, right? This means you have more calories to eat. It also means you have a bit more flexibility. So for example, when you're trying to reduce calories, you need to be mindful of things such as how much cooking oil are you using? Are you going to go for whole milk or almond milk that has fewer calories? Are you going to go for a steak with a lot of fat, or are you going to go for chicken breast? So small changes that can reduce the calorie content. But then when you're actually trying to gain, you can reverse that. It can be like, okay, so instead of going for chicken all the time, maybe I'm going to eat more salmon. Instead of having plain oats in the morning, maybe I'm going to add peanut butter to my oats. Or maybe I'll have, instead of having one, let's say a free meal, or what most people would call like a cheat meal, you can actually have them a bit more often. Or you can have more flexibility in the gaining phase. But again, this doesn't mean that you can have whatever. But you should definitely include some of these more hyper palatable foods that are easier to overeat in your diet while you're in the gaining phase, especially if you have a hard time gaining. And peanut butter for me, I also have, I remember when I was tracking macros on my last gaining phase, I think it was a year ago, sometimes I was already feeling a bit stuffed. But man, you just add a bit of peanut butter to something, it tastes great, and you can add like 200 calories in just like that.
If you like peanut butter.
If you like peanut butter.
Miguel, can you tell us if does a protein have the same important role like in a fat loss phase?
I think regardless of your goal, protein is always a staple. It's always important. But as I mentioned, in a fat loss phase, you have to manage your hunger, your appetites more than in a bulking phase, right? In a bulking phase, you're actually worried about the opposite. You don't want to feel stuffed all the time. And if you're actually overeating protein, you might feel more satiated, which means you're going to have a harder time to eat all of the calories. Now, if we go back to the recommendations at the moment, based on the current research, 1.6 grams per kg seems to be sufficient to optimize muscle growth, especially if you're in a calorie surplus. That in by itself is already anabolic, meaning it helps to build more muscle. So the chances of losing muscle mass while you're in a calorie surplus are very slim, unless you're not training or you're just, doing something very, very wrong. So this means that protein is still important for muscle growth and development, recovery, no doubt. But as long as you're hitting your protein target and you're eating high quality proteins, so we're not talking about, hey, can I get, can I get my protein from spaghetti? You'd have to eat a ton of spaghetti to get protein. But I would say if you're mainly eating good sources of protein and you're hitting that 1.6 grams as, let's say, your main target, I think you'll be fine. And protein is just as important, but you need to be mindful of how it can impact satiety.
You told us before that there's a limit on how much muscle can you win for the calories that you take. What's the guideline that you use with your clients for the calories surplus?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question. So
I don't know if it depends on the person, or it's just a guideline that you use, like 200, 300, 400.
Yeah. So there are theoretical guidelines that you can follow based on an individual's experience. For example, we know that beginners are more sensitive to building muscle, so they can actually, their surplus can be bigger because most of that surplus is going to go to building muscle, since their body is so sensitive to the training stimulus. But the more advanced you are in terms of experience, the less leeway you have, which means your calorie surplus will likely have to be smaller. So if you've been training for, let's say, more than 10 years, and I don't mean going to the gym and training half-assed. I mean being on top of your training, focusing on progressive overloads, focusing on nutrition. If you've been doing that for a long, long time, then chances are you don't need a very large surplus. And then you have these theoretical guidelines of, based on your experience, you should be aiming to gain X amount of your total body weight per week. I know some guys, for example, Mike Israel has some guidelines on how much body weight, a percentage you should gain per week. Again, I think these guidelines are fantastic and they can help you, especially if you're more of a beginner or intermediate. But then it's also very important to track your progress and also the visual changes. And wait, let me kind of rephrase that, because during a bulk, you won't be able to tell if you're gaining muscle or not, because you'll also be gaining a little bit of body fat. So it's harder to kind of gauge, hey, am I actually building muscle? That's why when you're in a bulking phase, I would rather have you focus on your training and your performance as much as possible and actually making sure that you're getting stronger instead of, hey, am I looking, are my pecs looking bigger? Are my biceps looking bigger? Because that's really hard to tell. Yeah. But usually you can use those guidelines as like a framework of, you probably don't want to gain too quickly, but then you might fall into the trap of, are you even gaining or you're spinning your wheels? And no one wants to be in a gaining phase for 6 months only to realize they've gained like half a kg and none of that was muscle or fat. It was just water or a bit of food in their gut. Yeah. So I would say usually I start with about, depending on the experience, but a good rule of thumb is about 15%, 10 to 15% above the maintenance calories, and then track the body weight. If the body weight average is trending within the guidelines and, again, performance, we're actually seeing progress, then that's fantastic. We don't really need to change much. But let's say that in 2 to 3 weeks, the body weight isn't changing, it's actually maintaining or going down, then that's not ideal. And in that case, you can bump up your calories, usually something like 150 calories. Try it again for 1 to 2 weeks, see how your body responds, and you can just rinse and repeat until you have that steady rate of gain.
It makes completely sense, and I think that your answer is perfect. If you can, let's talk about the situation of a person that is called the skinny fat. For a person that is that has a situation or problem, what do you think is the best way for them to go?
Mm-hmm. Skinny fat is, for people listening, is usually when you don't have a lot of muscle and you have a bit of body fat, but you're not fat, you're not skinny. There's this kind of mix, and that's where the term comes from. And usually this happens with a lot of people because most people, they don't train and their diet isn't fantastic. So you end up with, I'm not sure if I can say the best of both worlds, but the opposite of that. So it's like, how do you get out of there? So I have two different approaches here. One approach is you need to educate yourself. You need to learn more about, what are calories and macronutrients? How much does your body need? And is your diet relatively close to that? So that's one thing. And then training is definitely a big one, because for most people, if you don't change your diet, but you start training, you'll see properly, you'll see results. Usually you want a mix of both. And that's why the tracking macros is a good approach, but it's not my favorite approach. My ideal approach, and this is also how I actually started, is focus on healthy habits first. So, for example, training is important. Start with that. Learn proper form, learn what progressive overload is. Make sure you're training, make sure you're consistent with training. That's number one. If you can do that, it will change your physique. Number two, instead of worrying about all the macros and if it fits your macros, worry about actually having a structure with your diet. So, don't skip meals. Don't, eat pizza for lunch every single day. Learn what are protein sources, learn how you should structure a meal, and then have a similar structure from day to day. For example, if you like having 4 meals a day, start having 4 meals a day pretty much every day. Start having protein with every meal. Start adding more fruits and vegetables to your meals. Because again, most people have an idea of what they should be doing, but they're not doing it. So if you can focus on these simple habits of, I will try to add more protein to my meals, I will add more veggies and fruits, I will have similar meals each day, and I will train and I will progress, that alone in 3 months, it's probably going to transform your physique. And then, because again, when you're a beginner, most beginners are skinny fat, or most skinny fat people are beginners. When you're a beginner, you don't need much to have amazing results. Like, you can do a little bit of whatever, as long as you're consistent, and you will see some results. So if you can focus on the foundation first, or like the core principles, that is going to give you a lot of the gains. If you're more of an analytical type of person, sure, go for macros, weigh your food. Definitely, I highly recommend educating yourself. But for people that are like, hey, I don't really care about that, I just want to be healthier and feel better, etc., habits first, because if you have a good set of habits, then you can build on that. So that's my ideal approach.
One of the things that you said that I found, at least I found the daily basis, is that for someone that is starting, is that you don't need everything. You don't need to count everything. You don't need to train 6-7 days for a week. And sometimes people that start training are always worrying about having the perfect plan, having the perfect meals, having the perfect time to go to the gym in the morning or in the evening. And like you said, you don't need that much. You don't need to be worrying about everything. You just need to go there, have a nice workout, like you said before, and you have the results. And after having the training in your daily routine or weekly routine, you can improve easier, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Miguel,
great point.
Thank you. Can we just talk about the common mistakes? The fast loss phase first, please. 1 or 2 mistakes that you find in your clients or in your general gym.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to fat loss, I would say some of the most common mistakes are going to extremes. So following fad diets, for example, I see this happen a lot. I want to lose fat, no more carbohydrates for me. Or I want to lose fat, no more fats. Fats are the devil. So going to extremes, it's never good, because number one, it's not sustainable. Number two, you'll be missing out on something. So for example, fats are essential. Essential in nutrition means that your body can't produce something, so we need to get it from the diet. So if you're cutting out all fats, you might run into some problems. If you're cutting all carbohydrates are technically not essential, but a lot of carbohydrates do have vitamins, minerals, fiber. So for example, vegetables and fruits are considered carbohydrates. So if you cut out all carbs from your diet, you'll also be missing out. That's one thing, extremes. Number two, I would say way too much cardio. This is another big one. Like, people think, I want to lose weight, therefore I need to do as much cardio as possible. I don't know where this idea started, but cardio, it's important for your health, cardiovascular health. But if you're looking to build your physique, improve your body composition, you should actually focus on resistance training first. So we're talking about lifting weights and adding cardio as something you can do on the side or an extra. So I would say, even if you're a beginner, 3 times of lifting weights per week is a fantastic starting point. If you want to do cardio, do it once a week, twice a week, but don't do more than that. You don't need more than that. Focus on the diet first. Make sure that, again, calorie deficit is the main priority. Protein. If you want to track something simple, track calories and protein. If you want to go the extra step, track calories, protein, and fiber, or just add veggies, and focus on resistance training. Do that. You're going to get much better results than if you just do cardio like a maniac, which a lot of people do. And then with fat loss, there's a big mistake that we already kind of talked about, which is just focusing on the macros. Again, people think if I'm in a deficit, I'll lose fat, and they forget things like fiber, which plays an important role, not just on satiety and appetite, but it can help with your bowel movements, your blood sugar, your cholesterol levels, just your overall health. So don't neglect the basics. Again, fat loss is important, but that foundation of having a healthy lifestyle, that's even more important.
It makes completely sense. Can you tell us about the bulk phase, 1 or 2 mistakes as well, if you don't mind?
Yeah, that one I think we kind of talked about the biggest mistakes. The biggest one is definitely thinking bulking phase equals a dream bulk, which means you can eat whatever you want, how much you want. So don't lose the structure that you built during your fat loss phase, but it's like from 0 to 100, right? Yeah. You don't want to go from only eating quote unquote clean foods to suddenly eating cheeseburgers and pizza and ice cream and milkshakes. Like, you need that structure, but then that's mistake number one. It's you can't force feed muscle growth. So be mindful of your calorie surplus. But number two is exactly what you mentioned, which is don't be too caught up on the idea that you can only eat those, more nutrient-dense, high-volume foods that you were eating in a fat loss phase. So most people, if you have a hard time gaining, if you have a hard time getting more calories in, don't be afraid of adding things that you would not normally add during a fat loss phase. So don't be afraid of cooking with a bit more oil. Don't be afraid of adding that peanut butter if you like peanut butter. Don't be afraid of adding like 1 or 2 squares of chocolate at the end of a meal if you enjoy that chocolate. Don't be afraid of eating a slice of pizza because you enjoy pizza. So it's kind of that, don't go overboard, but also be mindful that you have more flexibility, and you should make use of that flexibility to make the best gains possible and enjoy the process.
Yeah. Miguel, last question that I will ask you. Miguel, what are your successful habits that makes you have your journey, have your body, have your that you use on your work?
That's a very good question. Powerful question. So, just for some context, usually I'll be the guy that says, "Hey, it's okay if you missed the workout, or it's okay if you feel like you messed up your diet, because there's no way you can fail. Fitness is all about long-term consistency, and it's important that one hot day doesn't make a summer. This means that if you have a bad day, this doesn't mean you ruined your progress." And a lot of people think that way. So that's one thing. Consistency in the long term is probably the biggest reason that I achieved my results. And it's the main reason people don't achieve the results, because they're not consistent. But it's also important to note that self-compassion is important, and you should be mindful that one day doesn't mean you screwed up. But you also need to cultivate that discipline that we talked about at the start of the episode. So, I'm not going to lie. There were many days, and I'm sure you can relate to this. Anyone listening can relate to this. There are many days when you don't feel like doing stuff. Like, you don't feel like prepping your meals. You don't feel like training. You don't feel like doing stuff, but you still show up and you do it. And I know with fitness, a lot of times people think like, oh yeah, but I really, I was tired. I didn't feel like doing it. And, I hear you. I hear you because I've been there. But then I also think about when it's about other responsibilities in your life, such as work, family, things that you can't say no to. For example, if you wake up in the morning and you don't feel like going to work, I know a lot of people can relate to that. You're not going to say, screw it, I'm not going to go to work today because I don't feel like it. But when it comes to our health, oftentimes we do that. It's like, I'm not going to do it because I don't feel like it. So there has to be this balance between consistency, self-compassion, but also discipline. It's like, if you have a plan, you need to make sure that you're showing up and you're putting in the work. And I always say showing up is important, but it's not enough. So for example, you see this all the time. You see people that they go to the gym almost every day, almost every year. Like, you see them, they are there physically, but they're not training with intent. They're not challenging themselves. They're not trying to make any progress. They're just going through the motions. And this is something that will not get you the results you want. So at the end of the day, it's a mix of having a plan, and again, a plan that you enjoy and it fits your lifestyle, because a lot of people try unsustainable things. But having that plan, it's sustainable, you enjoy it, but then also having that grit, that discipline of, I know there will be times when it's going to suck. I know there will be times when I don't feel like showing up, but I made this commitment to myself. And I like telling my clients that sometimes they, for example, when I ask them to do something with a nutrition plan, sometimes I'll get messages like, hey, I'm doing what you asked, even though, it's tough. And I'm like, hey, don't do it for me, do it for yourself. Because at the end of the day, that's what the coaching is all about. We're working together to help you reach your goals and create this long-term strategy that you can maintain even when after the coaching ends. So that's one thing. It's like fitness is an investment in yourself. It's probably the best investment you can make for yourself long-term because it keeps compounding. You age better, you have less pain, you're more mobile, your strength, you can maintain strength, you can maintain muscle mass. So I would say ask yourself, what is your why? Because that's what's going to keep you consistent. I know that whenever I don't feel like doing stuff, I almost have this internal conversation in my head like, hey, like you don't have to do it. Like you can literally just stop the workout and go home. And then suddenly I also have that other voice saying, yeah, but I don't want to do that because I want to be here and I want to push myself because that is who I am. And some people listening, they might be like, yeah, but that's not who I am. And that's okay. But it can be someone you want to become. And if that's the case, even the best athletes, they started somewhere. So if you know that you have habits that you would like to build, if you know that you're not where you want to be, but you have that vision,
desire as well,
then exactly. Like reverse engineer it. Where do you want to be? What do you need to do to get there? And over time, that becomes part of your identity. It becomes who you are. Like I don't even have to ask. I'm sure that even you, like you work in the fitness industry now, but I'm sure it wasn't always like this. You weren't a kid like, hey, I know exactly what I'm going to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a journey.
Of course. Just for finishing, I wanted to work on a zoo, so it doesn't have anything about fitness, but we grow up and we change. And maybe you can change our habits as well. Miguel, thank you very much for being here, having the time, having the work. Thank you a lot. At least for me, I learned. Thank you very much for being here, and hope someday we'll have you again.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and thank you for your time. Hopefully, everyone listening will also learn something, and I look forward to the next episode.
Thank you very much.